I'm so excited to bring a conversation with Leah Marone to you today. She is a psychotherapist, a corporate mental wellness consultant, keynote speaker, and a frequent contributor to publications like Psychology Today, The Atlantic, and Newsweek. And she'll soon join the ranks of an author of another type with her book Serial Fixer that publishes later this year. Before you get too comfortable on your therapy couch, you must know that she brings the goods working with high achievers, perfectionists, and those on the road to burnout with solid strategies and her experience as a former Division I athlete. I'm excited for today's interview as this is someone I've met on LinkedIn and have been following her content for quite some time. She frequently shares her leadership and wellness workshops for educators, healthcare providers, and executives as she helps them foster resilience, set boundaries, and learn how to collaborate better. So, Leah, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here.
I know. So, I know that, as I said, I've engaged with your content. I know that we've kind of gone back and forth to get to know each other through our content first. But you're not the stereotypical, what we think of as psychotherapist, because of your background as a Division I athlete and working with high achievers. Share a little bit about how you got from a Division I athlete mentality to this supportive psychotherapist.
Yeah, what a wonderful question. I think it actually just confirms too that, we are made up of so many different parts, right? And it's such a, I think, enlightening thing individually and such a wonderful thing when you find synergy between these different parts that you have that can sometimes be conflictual. Because I have a lot of grit, I think competitiveness, mainly with myself. I am kind of just give it all. I did fall into that cycle once upon a time of all or nothing living, play hard, work hard, and just, my inner critic is incredibly fierce. And I think once I learned to align with my inner critic and create space for me. I've loved creating space for other people, but I think that synergy of just the compassion, the empathy, the patience involved in psychotherapy and not taking false ownership and giving those pushes, accessing that grit and trying to empower others. That comes from my athletic background. So I think it's really a fun and I think, like I said, enlightening experience when I'm able to combine those two things. And so I love working not only with athletes, but regardless, just when you have that inner critic, that inner competitor that you love and you want to utilize, but sometimes, as we know, can become too fierce and kind of steer you down a self-deprecating path and just prevent you from staying in the present. And so it's finding my footing with that, but it's been a really interesting blend.
Yes. And what I hear in that is just the passion come forth. And this is what happens, right? When we go back to who we truly are and we can merge it and integrate it into our work, that's when the passion comes forth. And, that's what I'm hearing with you. My inner critic, I've actually given a name. I call her Miranda, from Miranda Priestley and The Devil Wears Prada. And that way I can see and kind of manage her a little bit better, right? So I really appreciate you talking about the inner critic. Leah, one thing as I was prepping for this interview and conversation was really, I was so impressed. At the end of last year, you came on LinkedIn and you drew a line in the sand, you drew a boundary, and you said, this is what my year has been like. And here you delivered 52 talks last year in 2024, worked with a very diverse group of industries, and still managed 800 therapy sessions. And you said, bye, folks, I'm taking a break from LinkedIn. I'm taking a break from social. And, as leaders, when we can demonstrate and model what we expect of others, that really made a statement to me that you were able to do that. So this modeling that we have, kind of what have you learned by taking that break of taking a step back from social media? And how long was it? What did that look like?
Yes, yes. And it is. There's an internal conflict that definitely happened when,
Mhm.
that decision was being thrown around because I think one part of me was, operating with through the critic and the urgency of just like, well, what if I lose traction?
Mhm.
What if there's an
Yeah.
irrelevance? What if I then, lose that and I can't get my footing again? And, really very self-centered approach in a lot of ways, I think. And then the other part of me saying, Leah, there's other parts of you. You want to be present with your family in a different way. You want to be present in this way. And these are things that you need to soak up and really be mindful about without the distraction. And that's going to help you professionally. And you're
Mhm.
preaching these things and you need to practice them as well, right? And so I think there's a combination of things, but I've learned through not only that and taking these breaks and not beating myself up if I don't generate so many posts in a week.
Mhm.
It's like it's okay. There's that grace that I can give myself and know because I've had several repetitions with it that I will find my footing again. And not everything is lost. And to be real frank, people aren't thinking about me as much as I'd like to think they are. So it's all good, right?
That's very true. We get all these ideas that, people are judging us and oh, if I'm not on, every day, they're going to wonder what's happened. They're thinking about themselves. It's just the way it is.
That's right.
Yeah, but with all of those sessions, I thought 52 talks. Okay. Yeah, I've been on a little run of speaking at the end of last year into this year, and boy, it can really be grueling. But 52 talks means you have your hand and on the pulse of what's going on. So, what are you observing in corporate leadership and workplace wellness today? Any trends that you're noticing?
Well, it's very interesting because one of my topics, and it is a buzzword, is kind of that burnout, right? That
Mhm.
burnout prevention. And the one thing that I love to highlight is that, we've all heard what burnout is. We've heard kind of the top 10 techniques. We've heard, some of those things. I think a lot of us can regurgitate those things at this point. And what I'm really interested in though is going deeper. And what I'm finding is that people know, just like with when it comes to maybe our health, we know what we should be doing for the most part. We know we need to get more sleep. We know we need to maybe eat certain things, stay away. We all have a general idea of that. It's again the internal conflicts that get in the way of being consistent and making those decisions that are going to be helpful. And so that's what I'm finding in corporate America. That's what I'm finding in nonprofits. That's what I'm finding in all areas of work and just professions that we understand these concepts, but what we're missing is the self-awareness involved in setting the internal boundaries and really understanding, back to that internal critic, that internal pleaser, that internal rescuer, what these different parts of us are trying to protect. And, it's we're not taking enough time to pause and really understand these parts of us in the internal conflicts. And I think that's where I'm really trying to create space for people so that they can walk away with more alignment. And it's not just, again, in this urgency cycle or all or nothing. And that's when you get burnout, is when there's misalignment internally. And you're showing up in conversations and showing up in relationships and leading in a way that is contributing to an energy suck, that is contributing to micro codependencies in the workplace.
Oh, I heard some psychotherapist terms in there. That's pretty cool. You got that in there. But the thing I think also is many leaders are, they've got this sense of urgency, right? This do more with less. And so they're into constant problem solving. How does this constant problem solving that they have, this need to solve the problem, impact their teams and their ability to lead effectively?
Yes, you hit it right on the head. When it comes to people, and I'm not talking, I have to share this a lot, because a lot of times when I do talk to companies or teams or, even leaders, they do see that name psychotherapist and they think I'm going to come in and we're going to do meditation and it's all going to be soft and gushy. And we're going to say, nope, we're going to just talk about how you feel. And a lot of it is I want them to know that I subscribe to the grit, the resilience, the urgency too. That's how I live in a lot of ways as well. And we don't want to lose that. That keeps things going. That keeps momentum going. But I think where we misstep, especially as leaders, is that we are taking away opportunities from those that we lead to gain their own repetitions, to build
Mm.
their own resilience. We're missing the empowerment piece. We can regurgitate it. Yes, I'm an empathetic, empowering leader, and I'm dabbling with how to be vulnerable because I hear that's important. But what we're missing is actually the steps and the patience involved in interactions. When someone that you're leading comes to you and has an issue that's not necessarily concrete, and there's a, kind of a very concrete issue or a answer rather, it's when they come and there's a dilemma, whether it's with
Mhm.
another person, whether it's with collaboration, whether they've, hit a barrier. And it's not just immediately taking that little bit of information that they share and doing the problem solving for them and taking that ownership right out of the gate. We're missing the step of validation. We're missing the step of saying, I'm putting forth effort to understand what the message you're saying and maybe the emotions that correlate with it. Because
Mhm.
what that does, Lisa, is it keeps the ownership with that person. And you, as the leader, have to then look at ways to channel their processing skills, keeping the ownership with them. What are their options? What are the next steps? Where can they learn? This is what we talk about in business, taking risks, taking, opportunities and, reframing failure. But again, this is a challenging thing if leadership is constantly coming in and just directing and saying, this is what you do, this is how it's done, and everyone's kind of running around as minions. We're missing the boat then when it comes to growth. We're missing the boat with empowering our people to gain those repetitions and those problem solving skills. So it is, how can I support rather than solve?
Right. And I think with that too, what I hear is, this empowerment is also going to build confidence. It's going to cause them to grow as leaders, to bring these people up to the next level that they do have potential to achieve, but you're really building the scaffolding for them rather than pulling them up on the rope, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it does.
Um,
It takes another level of patience.
yes.
But as you kind of make that change as a leader and where you're inserting yourself, how you're approaching conversations, that muscle will strengthen. That dynamic amongst your team will strengthen. And that's where, again, I think it does diffuse naturally some of that urgency because people are gaining confidence. They're keeping ownership. They're problem solving on their own rather than running to you saying, here's a, tangled ball of yarn. Can you unravel it for me in real time when you have 50 other things that you're working on?
Right. And I could see maybe from the leader a little bit of self-preservation coming in. If I fix it, then my team is going to look good. Like I don't have to risk some of this. Is that part that plays in it?
Absolutely. And it's a confidence and I think really understanding as a leader where your insecurities lie.
Right.
Right? It is, and where your ego fits in and all of those things. And that really can magnify the work that you need to do and the boundaries that you need to set internally as you're empowering and maybe letting go of some of that ownership. And that can be really difficult for some of us because that is a big part sometimes of what our purpose is.
Yeah, very much so. And not to get off track here, but I also think as parents, we often do this depending on the age of our children, right? Like when they're small, we're going to come in and help solve problems for them. But it gets to a point where are we going to give them the skills to become, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. And we could kind of look at that in business as well. Like what can we do to empower them? So just I thought that was an interesting track parallel there that we
Absolutely.
have.
A funny side note with that, it's so interesting because my two girls, I have two teens, and the one thing that they will say is that, Mom, you always say, what are your options? And
Right.
I do often, where, would it be easier for me to just, take the reins and do X, Y, and Z oftentimes? Sure, it would save a lot of time. But guess what? It doesn't save time overall. And there's that dependency then with like, well, I don't have to think through it. I'll just dump it on mom. And to your point, I don't want to be parenting still while they're in their 30s and 40s.
Well, and we've seen just an epidemic of this as these young adults go off to college and they're at college and they're not equipped to handle things on their own. They're still calling back to mom and dad. But Anyway, and this supporting rather than solving, is this some of the content in your new book?
Yes, it is. So this is that's kind of the ultimate framework. It ties everything in. And it's interesting because I've been saying that and speaking that phrase, support, don't solve, for a long time. And ultimately, I kind of created it for myself initially, as a clinician, as a parent, all of these things that when my empathy can run rampant and I want to just immediately soothe and fix and take ownership and creating, you have to be careful with creating these codependencies, even with your patients. And so really adapting this, Leah, this is not yours. You are here to help and be a support, but how can you support this person rather than solve? They need to get the repetitions. They need to keep it with them. And they might not do and make decisions and have the way that you would do it. And that's okay. That's not yours. That you're there to support and help them problem solve and externally process. And I think this isn't me, taking this whole framework and feeding it through corporate America. This is a way, though, just as humans, whether it's in a parent relationship, in a leadership position, in a friendship, we're losing that essence of validating and keeping things separate and knowing what our place is and leading with that empathy in a way that's empowering.
Right. I so look forward to your book. And when does that come out? That comes out
November
Okay.
11th.
All
Yes.
right. All right. So we'll make sure that probably have you back on the show. We'll talk a little bit more about it then. But no, very excited about that. So I want to move, since we're talking about burnout, I want to move to boundaries. Boundaries, I did an episode a few weeks ago. Boundaries are often seen as a personal wellness practice, but they're equally critical for leadership. What are some of the biggest boundary mistakes that you're seeing leaders make?
Yes, that's a great one. And I want to just highlight too, before I jump into that, is that boundaries, again, just to reiterate, boundaries are not trying to control other people. Boundaries are something that we set based on the data we've collected, to alter our responses and our behaviors. And I think that's sometimes misconstrued, and that's where we fall into traps when we're like, "Oh, I'm setting boundaries with these people, and nobody's following them." And it's like, well, maybe you're going about it a way that's not productive. So
Different way.
I think that's the first key
Okay.
with just boundaries. And it's so, I love that you brought that up because there's several leaders we talk about modeling where again they were able to speak and say all the right things to their team when it comes to, make sure you're taking care of yourself, make sure this, we have a big quarter coming up, we need to do all these things. But yet the modeling was very incompatible with what they're trying to share with their team. So the boundaries that they were trying to share and kind of, reiterate, they were not adhering to them. They were not, being mindful of when they were sending things, how they were saying things, how, they were taking care of themselves. They were just modeling, again, this sense of urgency all the time. And it was very unproductive. And when they were starting to diffuse, their team went right along with them. And
Mhm.
so it's not just about boundaries necessarily with time, because a lot of us can say, yeah, I'm going to try to turn this off. I'm going to not check emails after this time. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But the boundaries that come into play internally are we able to shut it off? Are
Mhm.
we still actually working internally and thinking about things at 10 p.m. when we want to be relaxing or, over dinner with our family? And that right there is such a common thing because we care, we're passionate about it. It's a huge sense of our purpose, but understanding why that part of us, why we're not able to put it to rest for a minute. That
Mhm.
critical part of us is if we do, we're going to lose momentum. If
Mhm.
we don't make this list, if we don't follow through, if we don't do this, we're going to lose X, Y, and Z. We're not going to be as productive, all these things. And that's the real work, I think, the internal boundary that needs to be set so that external ones can happen. I know that's a little abstract, but I think that's where the bulk of a lot of that happens.
Yeah. Oh, I've been guilty of that. I don't stop because when I come back, how do I get the same velocity that I'm operating at?
Mhm.
Yeah, but you get to a point, well, if you don't stop, then something will stop it for you, won't they? You'll get sick, right?
Absolutely right. And it is, I've had a lot of people look at me, especially leaders that are used to working, tons of hours a week. And
Right.
I, have said, I would love for you to experiment with yourself. And when you are hoping to close up shop, if you will, or you're headed home or you're, transitioning to another role, before you do that, I'd love for you to time block, even if it's 10, 15 minutes.
Mm,
You can take out a piece of paper, a post-it, whatever it is, and just kind of have a debrief of your
mhm,
day. What are some things that you got maybe a little bit of closure on? What are some things that are they're loose ends, which there always are? What are some things that you need to do or contact someone or whatever? And just kind of brainstorming some of these things and taking 5, 10, 15 minutes to have these micro debriefs for yourself. It's not going to solve everything, and you're not going to, they've been like, oh, I'm not thinking about work for the rest of the night. But what it does is it's a wonderful practice to give you just even a little bit of a bookend so
mhm.
that you're not up at night like, oh, I got to do this, I got to do this. It's building that trust with yourself that I'm going to try to beat myself to the punch so I'm not stewing about these things at 2 a.m. or at 10 p.m. And it's a wonderful practice to kind of set those boundaries with yourself.
Yes, and that also reminds me that using that paper, and this is one thing that I have had to develop, is I have all these ideas, and if I can put them out on paper and or a mind map and let it sit there, I don't feel that burden of, oh, I have to keep them moving or I'm going to forget it, right?
Mhm.
To be able to see it there, it just, I don't know, gives me that peace. There's probably something behind that, but
It validates it.
yes, I guess that's true too. I guess that's true too. So, I imagine this burnout piece too, Leah, that you often see people who are micromanaging. Why is it that some people really struggle to let go and trust their teams? And what would be maybe some steps they could use to try to change that?
Mhm. It is. And I think all of us, that term micromanaging, it does have such a negative tint to it,
Mhm,
right? And a lot of us, I think, would be take a step back if we were called that. You're being a micromanager. It's, it's this kind of, and really, I think it is driven intensely by our inner critic. It really is. Whether we're micromanaging as a parent, a partner, a leader, a friend. And what it is it's really ultimately a lack of trust. It's a lack of trust in our abilities to be patient and take a step
mhm,
back and kind of, remove maybe some of that ownership. And that might chip away also at our sense of purpose. But it's also trusting others. And there's a lot of us, and I've had this too, where there's certain situations, individuals, certain roles where you're like, I don't trust that this is going to happen. I
mm,
don't trust. But a lot of
mhm,
times, instead of thinking creatively and maybe setting different boundaries or coming at it with different approaches, which takes energy, which takes time, we accommodate, we swoop
mhm,
in, we beat everyone to the punch. And you can see where, yeah, in the short term, sure, that might work a little bit, but it's again creating these imbalanced relationships. That is the perfect recipe for resentment. That is the perfect
mhm,
recipe for exhaustion. And so, as managers, or leaders, if we are finding that, yeah, so and so, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, it's taking a step back and thinking, what might I be doing that's contributing to this pattern?
mhm,
Am I jumping in too fast? Am I not communicating from the get-go what the goal is, what expectations are? Am I not creating a situation where I'm coming at this conversation with curiosity and asking this person, where are you at? What are your deficits? Where do you want to work on? And even having people take ownership from the get-go.
mm,
It's a lot of times we find ourselves in a micromanaging position when we have not had that initial, and we can always circle back to it. It's not a missed lost cause, but that conversation where we're checking in.
mhm,
How are you feeling about your role? How are you feeling about this? What are your goals? What do you feel like you need? There's not even that conversation. So you can see as a micromanager, you're filling in the cracks and crevices. You're making assumptions. Well, I guess they're not going to have it to me by 5. So I guess I'll do this and I'll just contact this person and I'll get on them and then they're going to feel low. Like we're filling in all the gaps without having those very instrumental conversations and check-ins with our staff.
Yes, and I think that power of checking in, just having that communication, how are things going, just opening that up allows that other person to be heard, and it's not a one-way dynamic that's
Mhm.
coming in. I think that's really very true. So, we talked about boundaries. We kind of leads into some of this micromanagement. And one thing, what you, I think, also do so very well, Leah, is work with people who have these perfectionist tendencies. And, the more I talk about perfectionism and my relationship with perfectionism of who I used to be as a perfectionist and how I've been able to work through and manage it. Not that it ever really fully goes away. There's always a bit of that out there. How do you see that manifesting itself in high achievers? Do you find maybe high achievers tend to be more perfectionist, or you've got, your Division One athletic experience? Tell me what part perfectionism plays.
Oof. Perfectionism too is one of the ultimate, I think, protective coping skills, if you will, to
Mhm.
avoid some of the major things as humans we don't like, which is, however we define failure,
Mhm.
embarrassment, isolation, disconnect, negative judgment, all these things as humans that a lot of us go to extensive lengths to try to avoid, which makes sense. And so, if I just highlight, as an athlete, I had incredible performance anxiety,
Mhm.
mainly with basketball. On the soccer field, I was great. My hustle, get served me well. I couldn't hear the fans. I was in my zone. With basketball, it's very different. It's very
Mhm.
choppy. The coaches are right there. It's loud. I mean, you can hear everything. There's a lot more rigidity with plays and all these things. And so I can remember, just even starting games and beginning certain things and this whole mindset shift of don't mess up.
Mm.
Mess up, follow this. You're going to get taken out if you do X, Y, and Z. And just this like playing to not mess up. And you know as well as I do, you're tight then. You're
Yes.
not able to make, have that mind body connection and let all the repetitions and practice that you've
Mhm.
done just flow freely and be present in the game. And so a lot of that was, perfectionism. A lot of that was this fear of just messing up. And
Mhm.
that critic would be in my ear often. And even when I started speaking, that critic, what if this happens? What if
Mhm.
this? What if this? What if this? What if you're not prepared enough? What about, all these things? And I think as an athlete, way back when I was taught, just cover these up. Let's find some band-aids, let's find some pacifiers, listen to this type of music, make sure you're doing this, doing this. Those worked well, but
Mhm.
man, my critic's so fierce that she would just pop up and kind of discount all of those things. If I made
Mhm.
one minor mistake, it's like, oh, well, I guess this is going to be another game where I just don't feel like I'm in my stride. And so
Mhm.
I think for perfectionistic sake, something that I learned is I have to understand that part of me and what it's trying to protect me from and
Mhm.
align with it. And so even throughout my speaking, where it very much mirrored my anxiety, I think as an athlete, it was knowing that that part of me was going to pop up and say, yeah, what if this? What if this? What if this? But then almost inviting, like, hey, you know what? Hey, critic, I'm glad you're here. I need you. You're very motivating. But if you could just step down just a little bit and remember that we've done this several times. We actually signed up for this. This is not a life or death situation. And we generally feel pretty good once we're in it, about a minute or so. So if you could just stick around, but calm down a bit so other parts of me, the ones that are confident, the ones that are engaging, the
Mhm.
ones that, can be funny perhaps, if you give some room for them, we can all kind of work together. And I know that's like, wow, you're really having these conversations with yourself. Yeah, I am. Because what that's done is it's not shoving this part down and just hating this part and what's wrong with me. It's understanding it. And the more you listen, the more you soothe, the more you align, it's amazing how those perfectionistic, rigid tendencies start to soften.
Mhm. Yes, and I think seeing it, recognizing it, giving it its place, um, puts you in a power position to where we typically see perfectionism as something terrible that's done to us, like we've got this burden to carry. But that's a really great reframe, Leah. And I know there's a lot of people that are dealing with that. It deals with self-worth, and nobody can be more critical of me than I am of myself, just all of those things that go into it. So I'll look forward to hearing more of your take on that. Probably there's some of that in your book, I would think.
Yes, there is.
Okay. All right. So we're going to kind of turn the direction here. Since we're both women, I like to talk about women in leadership. Women in leadership often feel pressured to balance this authenticity, what we truly can bring to the table, with these rigid corporate expectations. How does this tension impact our confidence and our decision making when we know we have to fit into this model, but we want to bring some of the true parts of who we are?
That is, yes, that is a wonderful question. And I think, gosh, we could talk about that one for days.
Forever.
Um, I really, and this is, not just props to females, but I'm going to hover there because that's where we're focusing on. I think that women, historically and just in general, we're able to read a room very well. We're able to pick up on nonverbal cues very well. We're able to see and I think have a very, maybe we call it the empathy in us, the caretaker in us. We are very good at seeing deficits, seeing holes, and I think prematurely accommodating and stepping in and filling in the gaps.
Mm,
So even if someone in conversation, in a meeting, says kind of a vague statement, instead of getting clarification, or again, hovering with like, tell me more about that, or what do you envision? Keeping the ownership with that person. A
mhm,
lot of times women, and sometimes it's fueled through insecurity of I got to step up. I got to show that I'm worthy here. I have to show that I'm capable. And so we have that driving us. But sometimes it is that almost let me step in and let me just fill in the gaps here and
mhm.
go to step 15 before I really have recognized or we've aligned with what step one is. And so I've worked with so many female leaders that they'll do it even in their relationships or their marriages, where they'll get a statement that's very vague, like, I'm hungry, or, what are we doing here? And they'll be 5 steps ahead already without hovering and saying, yeah, well, it is almost dinner time, or, what are you thinking that you'd like? We're moving too fast. That's where our urgency is. And I think it's to our deficit
Mhm.
because then we are fueling these imbalances, not only in conversations, but relationships and our roles in the workplace. And so sometimes asking for that clarification, if there's another like option to validate, if there's another opportunity to say, tell me more about what you're thinking with that. Or if you're thinking, wow, I got a lot on my plate. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to that at this moment. We bypass all of those opportunities and we're already brainstorming and filling in the gaps and putting in the puzzle pieces. We're very good at that, but I think sometimes it's to our detriment and it puts us in situations where then we're fixing, serving, accommodating, and it's unfair. And people
Right.
sometimes can be taken advantage of.
Right. Yeah. It goes back to that solving, right? That keeps coming up. I
It
think we
does.
should have a book about that. So we'll do that. And I know when we spoke a few weeks ago, one thing, an observation that I've had is when women were invited into the boardrooms or had places around the leadership tables, like you even saw a shift in how we dressed. We moved from traditional dresses to, at that time, these big padded shoulder suits, right? To fit in with the rest of the people around the table. So, I think some of that modeled as well translated into how we felt that we had to speak. We didn't want to be seen as too soft. We didn't want to be seen as too tough. So, on one hand, if we're too soft, we may get talked over. And if
Mhm.
we're too tough, we're not going to be seen as someone who's relatable, even maybe a competitor. How do you help women manage that tension of
Yeah.
where on that continuum that they can speak authentically?
Right. And it is kind of that all or nothing mentality.
Mhm.
If I say this, then I'm going to be categorized as this. If I don't say anything, then I might be categorized as this. And that's where, again, this takes repetitions. This takes, building that muscle. But I'd love to just throw out this kind of framework of just finding the gray, not
Okay.
subscribing to black and white, all or
Right.
nothing, finding the gray. And that's where I think, giving yourself in those situations permission to pause, permission to ask for clarification or validate or keeping the ownership there. Because again, I think we find ourselves in this situation like, I have to ask the best question to show that I'm intellectually should be in this room. I have to do this. I have to do this. The pressure and the constant internal
Mhm.
turmoil that's happening is pulling us away from what we do best,
Mhm.
which is picking up on the nonverbals, picking up on potential tensions, picking up on, wow, what is missing here? And so I think this is, again, it takes building that muscle and that confidence, but not trying to kind of feed in or subscribe to necessarily what you're seeing, but understanding like, how am I? What do I want to contribute?
Mhm.
What follow-up question can I ask? What pause can I take? And something that I found that's so, gosh, it's just been so freeing is to say certain phrases like, I need to process that. Or can you tell me more? Or you know what? I need to look into that. I don't know. I need to familiarize myself with that. Statements that we historically have categorized as like, you don't know that? Uh-oh, people are going to
Mhm.
judge you as being, inefficient or this or that. But owning that with confidence, because I think as women, we sometimes fall into that, like, I'm just going to start saying a bunch of things to fill in the gaps. And then we walk away, we're like, oh my God, did that make any sense? And they did that, but they come across very different than what I did. That's where I'm saying that authenticity
Right.
of owning it, owning when you say something and you're like, that was fire, and owning it when you say, you know what, I'm going to brush up on that. Let me circle back to you on
Mhm.
that. That is confidence. That
Yeah.
is not succumbing to like the intensity of the room or just something where you're like, I'm not fitting in here. I need to brush up. Owning that and going at your pace and rise. I mean, that when you find that footing and someone in there is picking up on just cues, is able to sit back and is able to own things with confidence. I mean, that to me, when I see someone that is able to do that, male, female, I don't care, that to me radiates like, oof, we need to listen to that person when they talk.
Right. Yes. And, I can imagine as you were saying that, putting myself in the room, doesn't matter male or female. If somebody is saying that, I need to brush up on that. To me, one, I feel like they have listened.
Mhm.
Two, they've tried to categorize it in their realm of what they know. And three, they have a desire to learn more. My respect for that person, Leah, goes up so much to be able to do that. And it shows that they're paying attention, right? It shows that it is important. Yeah,
Mhm.
really great advice. Wow. No wonder you're so successful. You
Yeah.
really, really have all of that. So, if you follow the show, we talk about culture. If you follow my post on LinkedIn, I really care. First of all, I believe we were all created to do work that we love. And I believe that we need to bring that work and have workplaces where people love to work. So I'm seeing a trend as we talk about culture. The C suite looks at that, oh, culture. That's people. We're going to throw it over here to HR and let them deal with that. We've got to deal with the real problems, right? But these companies, what they don't realize is when they send those people over there, those people are the ones that are creating their profits, that are creating their operational efficiencies, that are either there or they're going to leave. So, my question to you is there's this resistance from leadership teams when it comes to addressing emotional intelligence, culture, and mental wellness. They see it as, as someone I know who is in leadership, it calls it namby-pamby soft stuff, right? Like that's for another time. We're going to do the real business. So, what's your response to leaders who dismiss this work as unnecessary?
Yes, I've heard similar things where leaders have said, "Oh, well, I guess this whole wellness thing is sticking around, right?" Like, well, it's kind of part of being a human, so probably. Yes, and it is. It is really. reconfirming that it isn't this just soft, let's all go through the workday, in a meditative state. That's not what we're after, right? What we're after is preventing kind of those swings of I'm exhausted, I'm not able to focus, I'm short with my team members, I'm this and that, to like, okay, now I'm on a high, now I'm on a low, now I'm on a high. It's finding more of that equilibrium. And I think so many leaders are, operating or attempting to operate at just a very, very high speed. And so they're
Mhm.
very confused when they don't have the trust, or they don't trust some of the people that they're working so closely with. And that only lasts so long. And so
Mhm.
it's not again about clearing your calendar and having, these in-depth conversations and all this touchy-feely, but it is about understanding how people learn. It is about understanding where their deficits are. Are they recognizing them? What are they doing to help with that? How are they contributing? How would they define their contributing to the team? It's about almost like being that coach, and you're leading and you're orchestrating. And if you are very individualistic and have your blinders on and are just hoping that everyone follows exactly with the momentum that you hope can just sustain until the end, you're going to crash and burn. And
Mhm.
so it is about what you're modeling. It is about, redefining or even hell defining for the first time what your real goal is and what is driving you or getting in the way of that internally. And that's the gushy part, as some people think. But in my mind, whew, that's the intelligence part.
Mhm.
That is the EQ, where you are taking time to generate that self-awareness so that you are more mindful about how you're communicating directives, how you're communicating just in general, and people are retaining it. They're listening when you talk rather than hearing just this frenzy. And so it's incredibly impactful that a leader does the work and aligns with, mainly that inner critic, circling back to that, so that he or she can really model and put to use some of these skills that are only going to boost productivity and the culture as a whole.
I think all of this very much needed, but it's great when we can see it in action. So, without breaking confidentiality, could you give us a scenario of maybe a type of leader who pushed back against this work and then later realized its value and what changed that perspective, Leah?
Oh, yes. I'm like cycling through who I should even talk about. Um, I think one of the biggest ones where there was the most resistance was a lot of the leadership team recognized that, their CEO, he needed help. He was on the verge of just either having a mental breakdown, or the company was just going to go down right with him. And he, of course, was very resistant and viewed this as like, who's this psychotherapist consultant coming in? Is this an intervention? I mean, what the heck's happening? We have numbers to meet. I can't, sit there and have coffee with someone and talk about my feelings. And so, that's not essentially what we did, but it was so interesting how there was incredible resistance, probably the first 3 or 4 times we met. And once he got a feel that I'm not here to disrupt and to just slow this pace down and redefine all these things, that's not my goal. But it was amazing when he gave himself permission in those spaces to actually talk about some of the internal pressures that he can't shut off, how he
Mhm.
can't get sleep, how he is medicating in the AM and PM to kind of keep himself at somewhat of an equilibrium. When he started to really identify some of these patterns and mainly the fight or flight cycle that he was perpetually in, it was absolutely astounding how his internal chatter started to decrease, his accessibility for patience, and I think just being more communicative and actually listening went up in his relationships that were causing an immense amount of stress on top of all the other things started to become a bit easier.
Mhm.
And that all happened because he opened, I think, certain barricades within himself to identify, like, yes, this part is challenging. Yes, this part is wreaking havoc. But in doing that, he didn't lose his drive. He didn't lose all the things that made him and got him to the successful level that he was. And I think that's the fear. If I
Mhm.
open this floodgate, I'm going to completely crash and burn. And that's where having someone to create that space and to, really kind of rehash and reframe and just clear some of that clutter. It prevents balloon pops, and it also prevents the crash and burn, which I think so many leaders, I mean, we hear it all the time. We see it all the time on LinkedIn. I was burnt out, so now I'm working for myself, or I quit corporate America and now I'm doing this. I mean, that fantastic. But I think there's a way, if you're not necessarily wanting to do that, there is a way to find the gray.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the thing I know, because I work with a lot of those people who do leave that, they're running from, they're not necessarily running to, and we need people in these companies. We need companies where people want to work. So much great value here today, Leah. What is something our listeners who can really work with their teams? What's something that they could do today? One small but impactful change to help better support their teams without burning themselves out. Do you have one tip of something they can do?
Mm, one tip. Let's see. That's a wonderful.
Just to start.
Yes. Just to start, I mean, I think again, I'm going back to that self-reflection of thinking about how your style, whether it's communicatively, whether it's just in terms of how you present in interactions, how that might be positively and negatively be impacting your team. So it's a bit of a reflect question. It's a prompt of just like the vibes that I'm giving off. What might they be doing to improve or actually harm, all the things in a negative tent, my team? And that right there is the first thing. It's not about the band-aids. It's not about the change first. It's about validating and assessing first. And that, I think, as a leader, just taking the moment to do that, that'll kick you off in the right direction and removing kind of that band-aid pacifier approach.
All right. So how can listeners connect with you and learn more about how to work with you?
Absolutely. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I also, my website, leahmarone.com. I have, my contact there, and my email and everything. And I would love to just even have a conversation. I love supporting the supporters. I love working with, high energy, competitive, even and high empathetic people that are so good at oftentimes staying the course, creating space for others, but lose themselves in the shuffle.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad we could make this time together to have this conversation. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh my gosh, anytime. Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Yes. So, workplace wellness is not about creating an environment where people don't survive, but thrive. And it allows them to be productive, engaged, and aligned with the company's mission without sacrificing their personal well being. I'm glad we're seeing this as a need, and even more grateful that we have people like Leah to speak boldly about it. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And we all know people who need to hear it, even if it's more than ourselves. So until this next week, find out what is it that you're passionate about. Take some time to pause and look at why it matters to you. Most likely, there's a story behind it that's worth exploring. And that will give you clues to find your legendary self, to find the person you were designed to be. And if you'd like some help on knowing who that is, reach out for my Next Steps to the New You program. I hold it several times a year, or check with me on your human design to get to the core of who you are. We'll see you here next week. Thanks for joining us today.